Welcome to the Leadership, Strategy, and AI podcast with your host, Nadia Gill. In every episode, we are on a journey to explore these dynamic topics with inspiring leaders who are making a difference. Hi, welcome to the Leadership, Strategy, and AI podcast. I'm your host, Nadia Gill. Liv Warren is a product-minded engineering leader who is passionate about helping biotech labs make decisions robustly and rapidly. Liv launched her biotech software career as a data scientist at a genome engineering startup where she developed machine learning models to help automate quality control decisions, which traditionally require intensive manual review from researchers. Inspired by these experiences, building models which require access to high quality training data, Liv turned her sights to building software products to help biotech companies design and robustly capture experimental data. She serves as an associate director of software engineering at Acon Therapeutics, a biotech startup leveraging bleeding edge imaging technologies and AI to discover and develop new therapeutics. In her role, Liv leads teams building software products to help drug discovery assays run at scale while generating high quality data for consumption by downstream AI ML models. Without further ado, here is Liv Warren and how is AI changing software engineering? And we are here with Liv Warren. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you. Thank you so much for agreeing to come and talk to me. I have so many questions. First time I am in this podcast with an engineer who knows about AI. So we're going to talk a lot about your career and how is AI affecting engineers' careers. But first, tell me about you. I mean, tell me about your career, twists and turns, the decisions that brought you where you are.
Yeah, absolutely. The short version is today I lead software teams that build products to accelerate AI driven drug discovery in industry. And there were a lot of twists and turns to get to this point, but the cool thing is that looking back, connecting the dots through, it's a lot of varied experience. I lean on every single chapter so far in my
Yep,
current
yep.
job, and yeah, and it's interesting because I also hear that from other folks in my industry as well. I think in
Yeah.
biotech there are a lot of different nonlinear paths, but the longer version is I launched my career in management consulting, so not engineering, which is
Yeah.
where we met, which was
Yes.
great. Yeah, and let's see. So in management consulting, spent bulk of my time working on projects with healthcare and life sciences clients. So that was a good sort of precursor to the biotech software chapter. And I think one of the big things I took away from consulting, and that's really kind of been a theme weaving through my career, is learning from leaders in consulting who gave a master class about how to present data-driven recommendations to clients in ways that both inspired action but also built trust with those clients. And whether you're working with an external vendor or internal customers at a biotech, that is so critical. And I think is really a day-to-day activity where you're doing elements of that either in very formal settings or in smaller discussions. And so really grateful to have that as kind of the launch chapter for the career. And since then, after consulting, worked at a genome engineering startup called Synthigo, joined
Mhm.
pretty early in that company's history. And that was a chapter where, got to have a lot of project variety, everything from image processing to backend web dev. But the thing that I'm most grateful for from that chapter is that I got to work with an incredible team of very brilliant, but also humble and collaborative
Mhm.
engineers
Mhm.
and scientists. And that really informed the environments and how I want to show up as both a colleague and a leader at work. And most recently, the past 5 years have been in, again, as I mentioned, AI driven dark discovery, and focusing on software products to really accelerate how quickly and how robustly we can do that. So, thinking specifically for my group about the very start of the drug discovery experiment life cycle, thinking about things like how do you help scientists and engineers design experiments that both run at scale but can also be consumed by downstream AI and ML models to learn things like this reagent that we tested could be a therapeutic. What are the next steps we should take? Things like that. So it's been a varied journey, but again, a lot of different kind of experiences that have built forward to this point.
Yeah, and you said something very true, and which is every twist in my career as well has helped me become the kind of leader I am today, and the technical knowledge or leadership knowledge I gained 5, 10, 20 years ago has been useful, and sometimes I still revisit those lessons. So it's an interesting reflection, and I thought it was very true what you just said. So let's talk about how do you see AI affecting your career and other engineers careers?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely a very kind of hot topic right now in the software space. I think every day on social media I see, new posts, new blogs posted about this, and it's with reason. It's a really important and interesting question. The caveat that I'll share up front is there was a blog post that Marty Kagan at Silicon Valley Product Group posted recently, and he had a quote in there that I really like, which is trying to predict the future based on newly emerging technology is at best difficult and at worst ill-advised. And he
Mhm,
kind of frames his perspective on a 3 to 10 year time scale. So
mhm.
I'm definitely going to take inspiration from there and share kind of a up to 10 year take on this. But what I think is really powerful and something that I do see continuing and actually increasing over the next decade
Mhm,
is how much AI is supercharging the ability and the rate of learning in
mhm.
engineering. There's a website called Stack Overflow, which kind of prior to this whole Gen AI explosion was really, I think the de facto online resource for software engineers to ask and answer questions from peers. So it's a forum where you can ask questions and other engineers will answer in a thread style forum. And then really nice thing about it is that there's incentive to provide high quality answers because there's a voting system. So people can upvote your answers, people can downvote your answers, people can
It
respond
is
to
the
them.
Reddit of engineers.
Exactly. It's the Reddit. I love that. It's the Reddit of engineers. And I didn't have access to Stack Overflow was not really a thing when I was taking CS courses in college. And
Okay.
so you learned at a slower pace because, you were using kind of more manual searches, you were reading books, you were waiting for the tutor in CS office hours to be available to answer your question.
Yeah.
And when I started using Stack Overflow in my first software role in industry, my rate of learning just skyrocketed because you were able to kind of go on kind of rabbit holes through Stack Overflow and dig into the comment threads. And I think what generative AI is doing in that realm of helping you learn and also learn how to learn,
Yeah.
right, is
Yeah.
making that an interactive process. And you can even ask it for, can you share the link that you got that particular soundbite from, which is really powerful. And so that interactive component and also the ability to synthesize and aggregate enormous amounts of data. I think that
Wow.
was really kind of the beauty of Stack Overflow being the Reddit for engineers, that you're synthesizing a lot of different perspectives together. And Gen AI is doing that, but order magnitude or orders of magnitude scale. So I think that is going to be a really, really interesting kind of supercharge to how engineers do and build software today.
I love the term you're using, supercharging. I have been saying for years now that AI kind of makes you a enhanced human. But I like now this better. Like, oh, it supercharges you, and and I like talking about this because living in Silicon Valley, I have seen several startups that at least as of last year, they used to promise, oh, well, with this one, you no longer need software engineers. And I would be like, really?
Right, right.
This is a good segue because love reading your blog and the things that you write, and you had
Thank you.
one post in particular on your blog about how we overwhelm engineers at our
Hmm.
organizations. Tell me more about it, because I think I have been guilty of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the post so I loved writing that post because it really the framing and the focus of that post is on imposter syndrome and how that
Mm.
specifically shows up and both overwhelms engineers and also from company and business perspective, there's a lot of resource drain that happens from imposter syndrome. And
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, and one of the really interesting things about it is that typically it's discussed as a very individual centric issue. And so a lot of the resources that exist right now, even around it, if you just like a quick Google search, they tend to focus on how can you as an individual increase your confidence at work. And there's so much that gets left on the table if we think of it just as okay, how can an individual engineer or colleagues show up in ways where they're bolstering their confidence at work. And if we don't also consider how can we as leaders and peers really intentionally design environments and processes that set people up for success and really lean into and embrace, imposter syndrome is gonna happen, right?
Mhm.
In engineering especially, it's a field where the impact of shipping a bug that crashes production or shows up in a really visceral visual way, I mean that's going to happen, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you really lean into that as a leader and as a peer and say, okay, we're in a field where we're especially ripe for imposter syndrome. There's, I think, also maybe a Stack Overflow, I'm trying to remember the source, but there was a stat out there a few years ago about 60% of engineers report feeling imposter syndrome at work. And so how do we attack that as a team sport? And I think the answer lies in thinking both about team processes. So some of the examples I outlined in the article are things like making sure that senior engineers aren't overwhelmed and burdened to the point that they can't show up and help answer a question like, hey, I'm having trouble debugging this. I've sat with it for an hour and I still can't get it. Do you have 15 minutes to connect today? Things like setting norms and kind of code of contact for design reviews and even for code reviews, which happen, I would say, at a daily frequency on a lot of teams, and making sure that the feedback that's being provided is really clear about, hey, these are the three things that I need you to change before I'll give you an approval, and making sure that those are happening timely. It's a very strong belonging cue if you're getting quick code reviews back. So everything from those processes to setting up psychologically safe team cultures and
Mhm.
organizational culture, you recover so much back because engineers are shipping features faster. They're operating environments where maybe it's de-risked for production environments where they know there's a database backup or there's a buddy system for a deployment or something like that. And so you're moving a lot more quickly, which
Mhm.
means you're getting feedback and learning a lot more quickly from your users, and that's golden.
Imposter syndrome happens at all levels in pretty much
Yes.
every area of the organization. I am not an expert. I know at least one expert on imposter syndrome, and I would like to ask her this question someday. But my impression is that I guess if you don't have imposter syndrome, that there might be, either you're in a job that it's not stretching you enough, or
Mm.
you're, or the ego is too big, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true.
But this is and when you were answering this question, I was thinking about, I work in strategy and I work
Hmm.
with all the other areas besides engineering, sales, finance, marketing. And with I get the sense that everyone is trying to move as quickly as possible
Hmm.
and to be as productive as possible.
Right, but I think that's so critical and so important and
Yeah.
so powerful is having
Yeah.
the sort of the multi-level
Yes.
inputs and perspectives and co-learning because I see the especially in software is AI sort of cutting out the experiences that maybe you would have, pre-Gen AI explosion with the early career experiences of debugging and really having to wrestle with bugs and then also ask your senior peers directly, hey, how would you think about designing this system, right? It's you get more maybe of that face time, but on the other hand, there's also the perspectives that I think, pre Gen AI as well, earlier career, engineer, scientist, professionals, really in any part of the org, are bringing really fresh ideas and perspectives, and having that environment where there is a safe to share, safe to pitch an idea, even if it goes against maybe like the status quo of your current tech stack, is so powerful.
Yeah, definitely. What are the trends in AI that excite you?
One of the trends that I'm really excited about these days, because it's one that my team has seen a lot of value with, I'd say, in late 2024, but also just enormously in the start of 2025,
Mhm.
is how, again, going to use supercharge here, how much
Drinking
how much
game for
exactly.
overcharge.
Go for another round, exactly. Um, yeah, I mean, I like Gen AI, I think, especially coding assistants, an opportunity I'm very excited about in software right now is supercharging and also de-risking, designing, and getting early feedback on new greenfield, either feature sets or entire products
Mhm.
sometimes. And the reason I'm very excited about that is I think the early phase of a greenfield feature set is both really fun and creative,
Mhm.
but it's also really high risk in some subtle ways because you're building something new, which means you don't have a lot of user and customer information and data about, are we on the right track? If you're extending an existing system, you have a lot of intuition already built up and data
Mhm.
points. But if it's something new, you don't really have that. And so the risk is higher, I think, with for these greenfield feature sets of maybe not building quite the right thing
Mhm.
or not solving the right problem. And traditionally, the way you de-risk that is say, okay, we're going to spend time with the requirements gathering, and we're also going to spend, cycles early on to iteratively develop, demo, and get feedback early and often. And the precursor to that, though, is that you are asking engineers to spend time building proof of concepts and demos, which may or may not make it into the production build. These are things that are short lived where you're trying to get information from your customers. And so there are two kind of issues with this pre AI coding assistant
Mhm.
debut. The first one is speed. So if you're asking somebody to do this entirely by hand, we're talking probably day to days long process
Wow.
versus with AI coding assistant, if you're, you can ask an engineer to guide
Mhm.
an AI coding assistant to build something, and I'd say, more at the scale of hours, which is great.
Wow. Wow.
So there's the time element, it means that you're getting demos and prototypes in front of customers faster, which means you're getting
Wow.
feedback faster, which is
Yes.
great.
Yes.
And then the second part of it is, in addition to the speed, you're also kind of taking the, I would say, often subconscious emotional attachment element out of it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
because if you're hands on and you've built something, even if you're not an engineer, if you've built a pitch deck for a client, right,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you've
If
put
you
time
spent
into,
a day and a half on it, it's my baby
yeah,
now.
exactly. There's attachment there, and I think it is harder to hear the feedback, especially if it's a little more subtle or maybe not as direct from a customer that's pointing the team toward, actually, we need to go in a different direction. This isn't going to solve the pain point or the use case for this customer. But if you were kind of guiding an AI assistant to do it and fine tuning and nudging and sort of fixing it along the way,
Mhm.
I've found personally, even I have less emotional attachment to that code. And I'm happy to put it in front of someone and say, hey, this took the team a few hours to build. Give us all of your feedback. You can have it be really direct. This is something we could tear down and rescaffold very quickly. And I think that also is more conducive to very valuable direct feedback. And that de-risks things like, shoot, we got to a late stage of the project and we realized that this actually isn't going to meet the business need, which is heartbreaking for everybody
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah. Wow, this is fascinating. In my field, we have the same experience, exactly what you're mentioning, when we are building a proposal,
Mm,
potential new product idea that we want to commercialize. And
yeah.
it took a week of four people sitting in a war room with no windows, trying
Right.
to get it right. And
Right.
and you're right, now with AI, the criticism goes to it. It doesn't go to the team who created it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's to it. And by it, I mean the machine, the
Yeah.
AI tool that we leveraged to build it, to create at least a skeleton at the beginning starting point, which saved a lot of hours. So you're right. This depersonalization, it many ways is like a game. If we are going to do this several times in several iterations until something it's great, and you will not be able to say no to this. You're finding the one. um
Exactly.
it,
Exactly.
let's talk about any suggestions for students in high school or people considering engineering. The
Yeah.
technology seems to be changing so rapidly. Would you recommend them, or where in engineering would you recommend them to go?
Yeah, I love that question. And again, I think that's very timely with the kind of broader conversation again about, how much of software is going to be automated on what time scale. There are a lot of different projections and guesses that people are throwing out, but coming back to the Marty Kagan quote, it's so hard to predict, right? And so, I
Get
think
the
back.
crystal ball out.
Yeah, exactly. It's just there's so many unknowns right now, and I think back to actually, I graduated from college where, we were a decade out from generative AI kind of transforming industries. And even then, I was thinking a lot about future proofing my career.
Mhm,
And,
mhm.
I've both my parents are first responders, so my
Wow.
lens on the world is, where are the risks, where are the pitfalls, and how do you kind of proactively mitigate that? And we were talking with one of my professors, and she had really good advice. She said you don't need to solve for the next decade of your career, you just need to find the right next step. And
Interesting.
that was incredibly kind of liberating advice at the time for me, because I was able to step back and think, okay, what is the experience that I think is going to give me skills and experience that I can just build off of that foundation? And so,
Mhm,
coming back to the original question about software, one thing I will say is that a lot of the posts that I've seen about AI and software as an industry and a field are focused specifically on the action of writing lines of code,
yes.
which is obviously a big part of being a software engineer. I think, especially in kind of early mid to career, that's a big part of the job, but it's far from the only part of the job.
Mhm, mhm,
And what I would encourage people to think about is, even today, looking at career ladders that companies build, and both the individual contributor, but also the management track for software engineers.
mhm.
Kind of a hallmark of hitting the senior plus level is this somebody who can ask two questions? The first, and can answer these two questions, is how should we build that?
Mhm,
But also, should we build that?
mhm.
And to do that, if you unpack that as kind of a high level amorphous question, you need skills in systems design. So the ability to make technical architecture decisions and trade-off calls about what technologies to use. But the other thing you need, and this is really important, I think this gets underweighted in the conversations today, you need to have the business context as well.
Mhm.
And what I mean specifically by business context is, things like, is this current company and or this project in a state where we're optimizing for speed of delivery, or are we optimizing for robustness and production longevity? Because that will dictate how and when you build and deploy things. We're talking about things like, how does this design fit into our overall architecture? How does it fit into our business strategy? How hard will it be to maintain this? How
Yes.
long do we
Mm.
intend to maintain this
Yep.
for?
Yep.
And then the other thing that I think is important to think about is, what domain knowledge
Mhm,
does the team building this need to have? Do we have that today? And if we don't, are we okay building a buffer in for onboarding into this project? And when you kind of step back and look at that in aggregate, that's actually a lot harder to automate than writing individual lines of code. And so, my recommendation would be to anyone considering engineering, the best thing you can do for your career is to make sure you're going to teams where you can partner with senior engineers, senior leaders within engineering, but also outside of engineering. I think that's becoming more important as well,
mhm.
to make those kinds of decisions and learn with and from them. And ultimately, the goal would be to make sure that you yourself are starting to make versions of those decisions that increase with level of responsibility and impact. And I'm very biased because 100% of my software career has been at startups. But I will say, from my experience, but also friends and colleagues' experience, startups are a really good world to have access to both those kinds of engineers and leaders, but also to have that kind of ownership. I would say, kind of early mid career. It's a good environment to be able to do that. So
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's kind of where I would advise focusing, is really making sure that you're kind of building towards those system and those domain and business context skills and experiences and knowledge sets. And then the other part of this being, kind of throwing back to an earlier part of our conversation, making sure that you're leaning into the being a lifelong learner in your career in engineering, because it is going to change. It's changing rapidly now. It has always changed rapidly. And making sure that you have a system and know how to learn and when to say, okay, I've maybe gone too far on this particular topic, let's pull back up a bit. I think that's also incredibly important. And that's another piece of advice I would give to somebody starting out in engineering in this landscape today.
Yeah, and another guest at the podcast, that was the advice for not only for engineers, for everyone, also
Mm,
who is starting their careers post college, which is, and also for people mid career or late career, which is with AI and it, you might not like it, but you cannot deny that it's changing the landscape, and learning every day and getting up to speed in the changes in your industry, it's a
mhm,
non-negotiable, particularly because careers are getting longer. We are going to continue to live healthy, hopefully,
mhm.
for a number of many more decades than our predecessors, so careers will extend beyond 60 years old. I firmly believe that.
Yeah.
Parting thoughts.
Parting thoughts. I would say this is a very dynamic and interesting time to be
Yeah.
in engineering. There are a lot of different thoughts and predictions out there. We'll see which ones come to fruition, but I am a big believer in circling back to the very first topic. Nonlinear career paths are
Yeah.
great. I think that's huge, and I think that will, continue to be a legitimate and valuable path, even in the world of AI, maybe even more so. And the ability to learn, and, with the asterisk of making sure that you're vetting what you're learning and also not, foregoing the human to human connections. It's a really exciting time to be in engineering. So those are the parting thoughts I have. Or there's a lot to navigate, but there is also a lot of tooling and impact, I think, for good on how much proportional impact we're able to have as engineers, which is good
Yeah.
when used for good.
This is very exciting. I agree with you. We are living exciting times. Anyway, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
so much.
you.